Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of 2 Feet Deep. We want to thank Silverman Sound for producing all of the royalty-free music that you hear in today's episode. If you're interested in experiencing some royalty-free music for yourself, head on over to silvermansound.com. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the big top. Okay, that's not what the show's called. It's called 2 Feet Deep. It's 2 Feet Deep, and I'm Eddie Bromley, and I'm here with Derek Markgraf.
Derek Markgraf. I can't even say one and only because I know another Derek Markgraf, which is
Yeah,
really weird.
it is really weird. I met another Eddie Bromley. He is in Ireland, and he said, "I know we're going to have tons in common." And I said, "All right, great. Can't wait to find out." Yeah, he said, "I like to get drunk every night. I like to start fights in the bars, and I'm always wearing boots." And I went, hmm, "Yep,
Yeah,
should have stopped it.
me
I'm Eddie
too.
Bromley. I should have stopped at Eddie Bromley.
You're like, I'm Eddie Bromley, and I like to read books, and I listen to music,
I like a cup of hot coffee.
I drink coffee
I run away from fights. No interest in them whatsoever.
whatsoever.
Whatsoever." All right, so
Oh,
we're going to start with entertainment exegesis. So, my family and I just finished watching Netflix live action adaptation of season one of One Piece, a show that I did not know even exists. I didn't even know it existed. But apparently, that makes me the odd man out because as of August last year, so okay, let me read a little description. Um, One Piece is a Japanese manga series written and illustrated by Aikiro Oda. The story follows the adventures of Monkey D. Luffy and his crew, the Straw Hat Pirates, where he explores the Grand Line in search for the mythical treasure known as the One Piece in order to become the next king of the pirates. So, as of August of last year, the magazine version has sold over a half a billion copies.
that's crazy.
Over a
That's
half a
crazy.
billion. And for several weeks, the live action was the number one streamed Netflix show in the entire world. And the animated version is one of the most watched television programs in the entire world. And I didn't know it existed.
Well, I know of it. I've never watched it. So you're ahead of me in watching it, but I've known about it for quite a few years because both of my sons have been watching it for years, and especially my middle child, who is now 15. Since he was about 13, I think he's been watching it because, to my understanding, there's thousands, literally thousands of episodes. I told him, I said, I think you unconsciously know Japanese because the animated version is not in English. It's only in Japanese, and you have to read all the subtitles. And I told him, I said, I'm pretty sure since you've watched every single episode, that you must somehow subconsciously know some Japanese. And because he told me, he said, yeah, sometimes I just watch it and I understand what's going on. Um, but he's had no interest in the live action because I've told him I've watched the trailer and I said, let's watch this together because I'm way too far behind to even remotely try to catch up with the animated series. Let me try to watch this with you. And he didn't seem real interested in the live action. All that to say, I am aware that exists, but I've never seen any of it. You gave me more information than he ever has in the reading of your description. He just told me it was a pirate show, sort of.
And it's a very, very good story writing. The author does a very good job of building a very convincing world, very interesting world. It's unique. It's different from any story I've watched before, even different from any pirate story I've watched before. By the way, if your son's watched every episode, he has taken into his brain 25,000 minutes worth of Japanese, which
Yeah.
roughly is 500 hours of Japanese. That's like taking
Yes.
2 semesters of Japanese.
Yeah, I think that surely he's got to understand it to some extent. When it comes to speaking it, and I understand, I don't know this for fact, but I mean, I understand it from knowing other people that have learned Japanese, that it is one of the hardest languages to learn. And so I imagine that there's no way he's going to just start ripping off some Japanese words. But I think there are probably some he unconsciously definitely knows.
Yeah. Um, what I, sort of the exegesis piece of this that I was thinking about was the fact that something could be so popular, so widespread, and still something a reasonably well informed person doesn't know anything about.
Yeah, well,
And
and it's interesting to me because you actually like anime, and
mhm,
and you didn't know anything about it. I don't like anime, and here I am aware of it. That's very interesting.
yeah, so what it got me thinking about was the book of Job. And Job suffers a great deal. There's so much that Job is going through that seems unfair. It doesn't seem to be deserved. It doesn't seem that God has honored Job by allowing Job to suffer so much when Job's been a faithful man. And throughout the book, he is just chomping at the bit to have his day in court with God. And when he finally gets to question God, God turns questions back on Job and says, Job, how much do you really understand about the world? There are parts of this world that you've never even seen. There are aspects of nature that you'll never understand. Apparently, there's even parts of creation that are simply for God's pleasure. Maybe no intelligent being will ever see. Um,
Mm.
and just reminded me of really what a small little part of creation where we are, and how and being finite, no matter how much we'll ever know or explore, we will not know even a small fraction of all that there is to really know about God's creation.
Wow, yeah, I mean, that's a great perspective, and that's a great point in Job because so many of us remember the suffering of Job. We remember Job crying out, but we fail to remember what might be most important, and that's God's response. Um, and that's a very relatable aspect for us in this life that we serve a God that is not bound by time, is not bound by experience, is not bound by space, um, is not bound by matter, you know. And so it's hard for us to understand that there is a being that understands beyond what we can experience.
Yeah.
And essentially, that's what we're kind of tapping into here is this idea that, God reminding us, like, how much do you really know about anything that's going on around you?
The One of the lies of our culture, one of the lies, it's a myth, it's not true, was the idea that ancient Christians thought that they were at the center of the universe. That,
Right.
as far as I can tell, was never widely believed by Jews or Christians. Somehow, in the midst of a vast, vast creation, we are somehow still central to God's attention, but not because we're the center of the world. In fact, th- Job 38 through 41 tells us we're not at the center of the universe. There are whole aspects of creation that are for God's pleasure that we may never know a thing about. And
Mm,
sometimes I've heard people say, "Well, what if we were to discover life on another planet, or other life were to come visit us? Would that cause your faith to crash?" And my thought is that if God is even close to what we are thinking He is, it would be surprising if there wasn't life in other parts of the universe, um, because there are parts of Earth that we've never explored where life is teeming. Well, what is that for? It's for God's own pleasure. It's there for God's own pleasure, whether we ever see it or not.
Yeah, I actually think that there's more of Earth under the oceans that we haven't explored than what we have explored. Um, it for me, like, and I don't know. Again, we do this show, we voice our opinions, and we don't expect everybody to have to agree with us on all points. And so I want to make that clear as I get ready to state what I'm stating. But I've always viewed the Bible as sufficient, but not exhaustive. It
Yes,
is sufficient for what we need to know about God. It is sufficient for what we need to know about His plan for us and salvation. But it is not exhaustive about who God is, about all that He has, can, will do. Um,
that's
and the minute that I think that the Bible is exhaustive is the minute that I feel like I start to pin God into a box. And so for me to say that there's no other life out there in the universe, can I confirm that there's not? No. Would I be surprised? I mean, I think all of us would be shocked in some way. Oh my gosh, there's life somewhere else that's here. But at the same time, it wouldn't shake any of my foundational faith in God because I recognize God's vastness beyond my understanding.
See, I guess the only thing I disagree with you on is I would not be shocked. In fact, what I'll be shocked by is if we thoroughly explore this solar system and don't find life. I don't think we're going to even have to get out of this solar system before we find something else. And I don't think we're going to find a civilization. I don't know that we're going to find a sentient being like ourselves, but I bet we find bacteria. We may find simple life,
I feel like
even in
we already
places.
have we not?
We've only found evidence of what could be. We don't have conclusive proof. We found things that indicate that the conditions are right. For example, the conditions may be right on Mars for there have been life in the past. Neptune may have the conditions for very simple single cell organisms, but we've not actually found those organisms. We've not found those things. So but I think we will not finish exploring the solar system before we will actually run across some other type of life. I'll be surprised if that doesn't happen.
Sure. And I mean, I think that there's total legitimacy in that there's so much unknown in spaces. Well, I mean, we call it space because there's a lot of it, right?
A lot of it. So C.S. Lewis uses the German word Sehnsucht, and Sehnsucht means that you're longing for something, but you don't actually know what it is. And he points out a passage from Ecclesiastes where it says that God has hidden eternity in the heart of human beings. And he makes this interesting argument that I don't think would be convincing to an atheist, but I find it very satisfying as a believer. This idea that one of the evidences that we have for heaven and for God and for eternity is that our heart longs for it. And it doesn't make sense that our heart would long for something that doesn't correspond with something in reality. And he makes the
Mhm.
argument we feel hunger. Well, that corresponds with something real called food, right? We have a sex
Right,
drive, and that corresponds with a biological reality that we're sexual
right.
beings. And he makes this argument that we pine for eternity, and in a sense that we feel that it could actually be fulfilled, and we feel a nagging when that it hasn't. So he makes the example that we're talking about that there's vast parts of the universe that we don't even know, vast parts of our own planet. But he says take the parts you do know, such as your friendships, your relationships, maybe the state in which you live. Have you given even that all the time that it deserves and that you feel like you could and should and would even want to give to it? And of course, the answer is no. I mean,
Mhm.
think about your relationship with your kids or your friends. And we just have this nagging sense that there isn't enough time to even do justice to the small bit of the world that we do know. And yet we know
Right.
there's a vast amount of the world that and so Lewis says that the longing that we have that there should be enough time for this tells us something about God placing eternity in our heart. There must be something that corresponds to that. That in some way, eventually, we get to give ourselves fully over to our relationship with our kids, to the books that are piling up on our shelf that we'd love to read and we just know we're never getting to exploring and understanding the world around. That there will, in some way, be a season, an age in which we can explore all of that thoroughly, adequately. So yeah, that's One Piece.
That's One Piece. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Um, the biblical perspective on One Piece, sort of,
A
not
biblical
exactly.
perspective on One Piece. All right, now we move to the section of the show called "What the What."
All right, tell me about this. What are you, this is a, I mean, I see your title here on our show
Yeah,
outline. I'm
that's
interested.
right. Yep. So I'm going to read a portion of Second Peter, um, and there's so much I want to read here, and I'm trying to decide where to start and where to stop. I'm pulling up my Bible app, and it's sad. I don't ever carry a real Bible with me anymore.
What's a real Bible?
Yeah, a real Bible, like a physical Bible. I just
No, no,
open
I
the
know,
app.
but I mean, I
Yeah.
would say, like the real Bible in the ancient times were in scrolls. So,
Right. I guess no,
you
yeah, no
know,
one really carried those around either, did they?
yeah, no.
Okay.
So, I mean, like,
All right. So Second Peter chapter 1 begins by saying, "Grace and peace be to yours in the abundance through your knowledge of God and of our Lord Jesus. His divine power has been given to us, or his divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and goodness. Through these things, he has given us very great and precious promises, so that through them, and here's the key piece, you may participate in the divine nature, having escaped the corruption in the world caused by evil desires." So,
mm,
Peter makes this argument that everything God has done in Jesus is so that we might participate. And there's really two ways to translate it: either participate in the divine nature or to participate in the divine life. And so,
so what does that mean, right?
yeah,
Is
what
that
does
kind of what
that
we're getting
mean?
at here? That's what in the world does that mean? Are we sure this is 2 feet deep?
Yeah, shoot, yeah, this is 10 feet deep, isn't it? Uh, that we might participate in the divine life. So, at first, this may seem like something very, very foreign. Where in the Bible can we find any language like this? And I would say, well, one of the places where we can find language like this is in the Gospel of John,
Mm,
where Jesus says that he and the Father share one life together. And it's up in the upper room, which are chapters 13, 14, 15, and 16. And Jesus says, "Father, I pray that they may be one, just as you and I are one, that they might be one with each other, and that they may be one with us, just as I am in you, you are in me, so may they be in us." And so, in and I think this is the Reformation teaches us, let Scripture interpret Scripture, and Jesus is in the upper room. The Gospel of John is saying that everything he's done is so that we might know God, not just know about him, but that we might know him intimately, and that the relationship that Jesus and the Father have, that relationship is opened to us. So let's take another place to see if Scripture can shine light on Scripture. So um, Romans chapter 8 says that through spiritual adoption, we come to be the sons and daughters of God. Jesus
right.
is the only one who, by his nature, starts out as the Son of God, right? But through adoption, through the giving of the Holy Spirit, we become the adopted children of God. We begin to experience the relationship to the Father in the same way that Jesus experiences the relationship to the Father. Not because we become like the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh member of the Trinity, but because that relationship has been open to us. The household of God has invited us in. And in fact, First John chapter 2 says, how surprising is the love of God that we would be called the children of God.
Right.
This is John saying this is, this is more than we could have expected from the Messiah. I mean, this is more than what we thought the salvation would be. We've been invited to become members basically of the family of God, which is not really explicitly a part of the Old Testament expectation for the Messiah.
Yeah, it seems more relational than simply being saved. And you can think about that as anybody, in the simplest terms. What's your relationship with your doctor? I mean, there's some amount of trust there, but you don't come to them for every need. There's a specific need, and they come and they might be able to save you from whatever affliction that you're currently suffering from. Um, but it's still not relational. And
No, they don't invite you to go live in their house.
right, this divine life to be experienced seems so much more relational than just let me come and save you.
Because he could have done that without inviting us to participate in that fellowship, right? I mean, I think your illustration of a doctor is perfect. You might use the illustration of an auto mechanic. You don't invite that person to come live in your house, and they don't invite you to come live in theirs. They may do, they may literally come save you too. You may be broken down on the side of the road, and they come and rescue you,
Hmm.
right? But they don't bring you home and give you their last name and give you access to their checking account.
Right, right. And that's cool because you bring up the point that like the divine life comes with all the privileges.
Yeah. All right. His name, news game. All right. This is the very wild card of the whole show. This is where we,
That's that's a good way to put it.
yeah, we try to stump the other. We tell the other a news story, and then we try to get them to imagine tying this into a sermon, a Bible study, in some kind of way. Um, and this one's really hit or miss. I know my last one, the top of the banana. You know, Derek, you were not thrilled with that
Well,
one, but I think of
it's not that I wasn't thrilled. It was I think you even pointed out in the show, it wasn't even a news story,
no, it really wasn't. So what I
which was
was
definitely kind of
so
the
for
point.
that show, really, it was kind of the point of the whole thing. So I typed in weird news stories and whatever, and Google brings up the top of the banana, and I read it, and I'm like, this is not this is not news. And it wasn't like 50 searches down. It was in the top 10 or something. It was one of the first results, and so I read it, and I think this isn't even a news story. This is not a news story. What is this? It's just an isolated fact about bananas. So I was like, yeah, that's
That's
fine.
it.
That's
That's
it.
it.
That makes the
Yeah, of
cut.
course it does.
All right. This one is fascinating. I've actually am going to share two links in the show descriptions. One is the history of root beer.
Oh, root
So,
beer.
yeah, the history of root
I
beer.
hate root beer.
You hate
Me
root beer?
too.
Oh my goodness! All right, I'm just connecting right now. Um, so in rural America, in rural Britain, the brewing of beer was about as common as the baking of bread. It was something almost every family did. Almost every family would brew their own beer. And I guess they realized sometimes they needed something a little lighter than a lager, and so families began brewing something called a small beer, as opposed to a big beer. But small beer meant a non-alcoholic drink, and sometimes it might have sarsaparilla, sometimes it might have mint, sometimes it might have berries or other kinds of herbs or
Sure.
just
Yeah.
different flavors. And nearly every household had their own recipe. it was it, related to this is the next story, the history of A&W. So the proprietor who created A&W is the first to begin to really push a specific taste, a specific kind of small beer as a root beer, and to really begin giving it a very recognizable character and taste and flavor and quality. He got the recipe, he paid for it, he didn't steal it, he got it from a pharmacist who made sodas and different things, and he began to mass market A&W, which, by the way, was the first fast food chain in America.
Yes.
And it had a lot of success, but during the rationing of World War II, it caused a lot of them to shut down. But after World War II, a lot of men came back from military service. They had money through the GI Bill and other things, and had ways of borrowing money to start new businesses, and A&W hamburger shops started showing up all over America. In fact, what's interesting is at first, the only thing they had in common is that they sold A&W root beer. The menu wasn't made uniform for quite a while after that. You could sell any kinds of combinations of food, but the unifying theme was the root beer itself. All right,
Okay.
a little better than top of the banana.
Yeah. Well, at least this is interesting. And you know,
Yeah,
I,
you didn't fall asleep during it.
well, the other one wasn't long enough to fall asleep during. Um, I mean, I'm gonna draw on maybe a couple of Old Testament scriptures here, because root beer is has a very strong specific flavor, and it doesn't matter whether it's oh heck, I don't even know the brands of root beer. I know that my parents like something that's like a starts with a S, like I don't know, maybe like a Starnes or something.
Sarsaparilla.
Well, no, I think that's the main ingredient in all root beer, right? So it's because it's from a
I don't
sassafras
know.
plant. So, but
I don't
okay,
know.
you're like I did all this research, but I don't know that the basic ingredient. Oh man, well, it's a strong drink, so I'm going to talk about some strong drink. Deuteronomy 14:26. You may spend the money for whatever your heart desires, for oxen or sheep or wine or strong drink, or whatever your heart desires. And there you shall eat in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice, you and your household. Now, I have no idea why you would rejoice if you were drinking root beer in the presence of God. I would rejoice if God were to remove root beer. There's another one in Proverbs 31, give strong drink to him who is perishing, and wine to him whose life is bitter. Um, I mean, there's thousands of verses in the Bible. I say thousands, that's probably exaggerating, but there's quite a few verses about strong drink that I could bring up. Isaiah 5:11, woe to those who rise early in the morning that they may pursue strong drink, who stay up late in the evening that wine may inflame them. To me, root beer is a terrible, horrible tasting strong drink. And so, from that perspective, I would pull up every Bible verse that doesn't support drinking, even though there's plenty of Bible verses about drinking, since there's some of them that I did read.
I like your Proverbs one, give strong drink to those that are dying whose life's been hard. Here, your life sucks. Here's
Here's
root
root
beer.
beer. That's right. That's right. Right. Your life is terrible. Let me make it worse. No, I don't know. I mean, like, my mom loves root beer, and so I don't know. On her deathbed, maybe that might soothe her. I don't know. But I do not like root beer, but that's funny. Yeah, I have nothing beyond relating it to strong drink.
Well, I'll just, hey, Derek, the next time you're having just a horrible week, I go, look, your life sucks. Here's a consolation prize. It's root
Yeah,
beer.
or it could be at least you're not drinking root beer. Now,
At least you're
I
not
have a
drinking.
I have a question. Do you like root beer?
I love root beer. Yeah, I love it,
Well,
actually.
I'm
Yeah.
curious because we know that there are beers, there are ales, and of course there's a famous soft drink called ginger ale. And I'm
Hmm.
curious, was ginger ale a small beer at one point? Or
It was
yeah,
actually.
okay.
I actually saw that in the research. Actually, it was. Yep.
So okay, interesting. I had a Super Bowl party at the church one time, and all the drinks I bought were root beer and ginger ale, so we can have beer and ale with our wings. I'm not sure that everybody found the humor in it like I did, but I thought it was awesome.
Well, it's funny because as Methodists, we have this really interesting history with alcohol. So, um, the first Methodist in Britain would have saw very little problem with having beer. I mean, I think they warned against strong spirits because they knew that those were pretty high intensity, could really cause big problems. But John Wesley brewed his own beer in order to save money, so he could give the money he would spend otherwise to the poor. But when Americans began, or when Methodists began to spread the gospel on the frontiers of America, it really was a wild place. And the average American drinks something like a gallon of strong drinks every week.
Ugh,
I mean, so the average American was drinking 52 gallons of hard liquor every year. Alcoholism and many of the problems associated with that ran rampant.
sure.
And it wasn't long before the Methodists began to incorporate as part of their discipline a complete abstention from alcohol
Right, because
and
don't cause your brother
began.
to stumble.
Right. And so it's really interesting that in the 21st century, most Methodists are pretty relaxed about alcohol. I mean, most of the people in my church would offer me a beer or a glass of wine if I came to their home. And it's just interesting how our sensitivities and our sensibilities about those things, change depending on the circumstances.
And I think rightfully so. I think that there's times that we have to be more protective about it because overindulgence in anything, for that matter, it can be a problem. One of the things that we don't often talk about or that we make an excuse for is food in America and the obesity
Yeah.
rate. And I'm singing to the choir here because I myself am overweight, and but nobody has problems going out with taking you out for any meal, however healthy or non-healthy it might be. But and then there's always the excuse, yeah, but you need food to live. Well, yeah, but you
Yeah.
don't need it in the quantities that we put it into our system. And again, that's
That's right. The ancient church considered gluttony and drunkenness to be two sides of the same coin. In fact, they really considered them expressions of the same sin, is that God has given these things for pleasure, but the extent to which you're indulging in them that's doing damage to you as a human being, something's gone wrong, right? So, and I've heard people who will excuse gluttony say, "Well, yeah, but you have to eat. You don't have to drink." But my retort to that would be, uh, last week when you brought jelly donuts to the men's group, what you're right, you have to eat, but you don't have to eat a jelly donut, and there's absolutely no nutritional
right.
value in a jelly donut,
Sure.
right? Zero,
Right.
zero. There's nothing about it that's good for you at all, in the same way that they may argue, well, beer, there's nothing good for you in beer.
Right.
um, the point is, the ancient church would have not frowned on a jelly donut or a beer, but would have said to somebody that was eating a whole box of jelly donuts,
That's a
um,
problem.
you've moved from, yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Or somebody who has had 8 beers before 9 o'clock in the morning and can't hardly get to work, they would say, okay, we've got a problem here. Something God has given for pleasure is now distorting you as a human
Right.
being.
Right.
We've got a problem,
Yep.
right? So, it's funny. I didn't expect us to go in such a serious direction
Yeah. For
on
the
root beer,
goofy
but
news story, that one I mean, it brought up some good stuff, but hilarious nonetheless. Just remember, folks, that if you're suffering, there's always root beer.
that's right. That's right. That's right. It's the consolation prize.
Proverbs says so.
All right, we are moving on to eschatological AI. Just in case you might be thinking, what does eschatological mean? It means dealing with end times, dealing with the end of the age, the beginning of the new age in creation when God since Christ back in glory. And so anytime something is uh, causing a radical shift in our culture, a radical shift in the age in which we live, it belongs, at least to some degree, to this idea of eschatological theology. So uh, today we're talking about AI plays Othello.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic that I think that we are going to end up. I mean, I hope there's some good conversation here because this is really interesting and a little scary.
Yeah. So the question is, if you know anything about ChatGPT 4 and some of the other large language models, is that the, one of the theoretical questions being asked right now are these things thinking, or are they just simply processing information? So what they did with ChatGPT 4, every single thing that has been published, this thing has read. So it has all of this big database. And technically, all of it's supposed to be doing when you ask it a question is it has seen enough patterns that it recognizes the word patterns and is able to give a pretty reliable, predictable answer just based on patterns. It's not supposed to really be thinking, it's not really supposed to be, it's mimicking thinking, but what it's really doing is plowing through mountains of information and giving statistically the most likely answer. But what ChatGPT 4 and other large language models have begun doing are things that seem to go beyond that and seemingly go beyond what they're programmed to do. And so one of the real questions that they're trying to answer is are these AI actually thinking, or are we projecting, anthropomorphizing these things to see something that's not really there? So, for example, anthropomorphizing something is when you treat a stuffed animal like it's a living thing, even though you know it's not.
Okay, all right.
We Yeah, so we were walking in Alaska, and somebody had a marionette, and it was a very beautiful, intricate little marionette, and the person working it was a master at it. Now, I could see all the strings. I could see that it was attached to his hand, but when he made the thing wave at me, I waved back like I was waving to a small child or
Right,
something.
right,
At some rational level, I see the guy controlling the puppet.
right,
I don't believe it's real. I don't believe it's a real anything. It's just a tool attached to his hand. But because it resembles a little person, because it is mimicking a real person, I'm treating it as it is. So, are we doing something like that with AI? So, recently, some researchers fed information from thousands of Othello games. And you know, the Othello's the kind of like checkers, a little bit like chess. It's black and white chips, and you move them on the board.
Aren't you trying to like flip the amount of that you have versus your opponent, right? It's some kind of game where you're trying
That's
to
right.
end up with the majority of your color on the board. So there's a little bit of a
That's right.
strategy of domination in the game, if I'm correct. I've
Right.
not played Othello, but I've seen it, and so I'm just trying to make sure that I understand it as well as maybe other listeners.
That's correct. Well, for those that are serious at playing Othello, like people are trying to learn strategy and whatever, there are notations that you can make, and rather than just writing out longhand everything that's going on in the game, there's little notations that you can go back, and if you know what you're looking at, you can reconstruct the game based on these notations. If you don't know what you're looking at, you can't do anything with it. It just looks like, D1 to D5, and if you don't know what D1 to D5 is, you're lost. You don't know what it's describing at all. But if you know it's describing Othello, then you can go back and reconstruct the game and learn from it, and build, and kind of play through it yourself. So what they did is they gave an AI the notations from thousands of Othello games. They never told the AI what it was. They didn't say it was a game of Othello. They didn't do anything. They just gave it these notations. And then they were able to look at what the programming was doing internally. And what the program began to do, it began to extrapolate. It began to make a guess about what it was being told. And it begins to construct internally a visual representation of Othello game. In other words, it begins to understand and it begins to guess that what's being described to it is a game.
So it has no reference previous to this
Right,
that the game
right.
Othello even exists. Is that what you're saying?
It probably had Othello somewhere in its database. It's read everything, so it probably had that in there somewhere. But these notations, if these notations are vague enough that you wouldn't necessarily be able to guess that it's describing an Othello game. In fact, even you would have to make a guess. In other words, you wouldn't be able to see that and know for sure without making some hypothetical guesses, because because there's similar notations for a lot of different kinds of board games and a lot of other
Sure.
kinds
Yeah.
of.
Yeah. Even in chess, you hear that kind of talk.
That's right. So the computer begins to make guesses, it begins to extrapolate, and it begins to imagine. And these words may not be precise enough, but
They're very human. They're very humanistic words. You know, we don't
right,
think of technology imagining anything. We think of technology as
right.
essentially returning information back to us that we've entered into it. And what you're saying
That's
is
right.
this isn't exactly what's happening here. You're saying that in its database somewhere it might have some idea of Othello, but with the information that we've given it, it's had to actually process in its
Right.
quote unquote mind what this looks
Right.
like, and then begins to paint that picture for us. Is that kind of what you're?
That's right. That's right. So it begins to picture, and that, again, that may not be the right word, but it begins to imagine, picture, understand that a game of Othello, and it begins to describe, it begins to build conceptually the game of Othello internally.
Does it understand that it's a game, or do we know?
Well, we don't
Uh,
know. We don't know what we don't. Well, that in fact that very word is what we don't know. Does it understand anything?
Anything? Yeah, man. Well, I mean, this makes me think of a meme I saw on Facebook not long ago that said, "Does this newfound power of AI concern you?" And the response was, "Well, yeah, it concerns me. Haven't you ever seen Terminator?" But you know, there's some truth to this idea of, I'm just gonna say, if a machine can think, how do we continue to put ourselves in a place where we can outthink it? Because if you just gave me a description of D1 to D4, B3 to C7, I mean, that could be a million different things, you know, including like
That's right.
some kind of codes, um,
That's right.
something to be deciphered, you know, some kind of language, to obviously some kind of a chess game, to some kind of I mean, it could be nonsensical and mean nothing. And
That's exactly right. Yeah, it begins to connect the dots, and it begins to have some realization that what's being described is a game, and it begins to describe the game correctly. And yeah, I mean, yeah, you raised the question: how can we keep outthinking it? Well, so currently, theoretically, we think that ChatGPT 4 has an IQ of 145. If that's true, then that means it's smarter than about 90% of all the humans that have ever lived, because only a very, very small fraction of human beings have ever had an IQ of over 145, maybe about 10% of the population. The next iteration is expected to have an IQ of about 1,000.
yeah, and is that ChatGPT 5?
Yes, and of course these are guesses. Guesses about the future of technology always end up being wrong in lots of
Sure,
ways,
sure.
but not completely. But let's let's say that the next iteration does have an IQ of 1,000. The highest IQ possible in a human is 200. It will make, by a magnitude of five, it will make the next iteration of Chat GPT smarter by a magnitude of 5 than any human that's ever lived on planet Earth.
Right, and that's I know you and I have discussed this before outside of this show. I don't remember, I don't think that we've come across anything so far, and you correct me if I'm wrong, to where we've discussed it on the show about how, as a society, in some ways, this is probably true for atheists and agnostics. There's a struggle of intelligence versus what they perceive to be either mythological, legend, or something that's um, unprovable. Even though I would say agnosticism and atheists are both faith-based religions, honestly,
Yes,
no
yes,
different
yeah.
no different than Christianity.
Having been an atheist, lots of my premises were based on faith and non-empirical thought.
Right. And so there is a sense in which society worships knowledge. And at what point
Yes,
does AI stop being machinery and become something that people begin to worship?
yeah.
You begin as someone who's a man of faith, I look to God for my answers as often as I can. I'm a sinner and I don't always turn there first, you know, but that's ultimately where I try to find my answers and who I seek in all scenarios in life, both in joy and in uh, struggle. And I think it's a terrifying thing to turn to a machine as your God, um, it's something you created. It's the golden calf all over. You know, the familiar story in Exodus, where Moses comes down from the mountain with the Ten Commandments and he finds Aaron, and the Israelites have built a calf and decided that it's God and it's God enough to worship. And that's only one aspect of 1,000 different concerns you could go off of. But are we building a golden calf?
We're building as something. If the next iteration has an IQ of 1,000, they guess, and again, it's just a guess. But there are real mathematical reasons for believing that these numbers are real because
Well, and even if it's not the next iteration, we'll eventually get there.
yes, and I'm looking up the term. I'll be honest, I've forgotten the term. Oh, yes. Okay. Moore's Law. Moore's Law is a computer law that has been proven many, many times. People thought it would break down at some point. Moore's Law is this idea that computing processing will double about every 18 months. And so, and every time we think, well, we can't do that, it's not going to be able to do that in the next phase because we've run out of room on microchips or microprocessors. We figure out a new way to go and make Moore's law happen anyway. And so, since the dawn of computing, Moore's law has proved to be true every single step. And sometimes we've even jumped over the doubling. Sometimes we've done more than doubling. And so, based on that, ChatGPT 6 would have an IQ of 10,000, magnitude of 50, more intelligent than any human that's ever lived.
Yeah. Well, and that's just something that's unfathomable. I mean, we can't even hardly fathom this idea of something that's 1,000. I think it was you that gave the illustration of if you put a bunch of babies in the room and they were to try to outwit Einstein, who's just sitting in the same room, what's the probability of that? And it's not a possibility. I mean, it's just really not a
Yeah,
possibility that an infant could outwit Einstein, but it could outwit you or me,
that's right.
much less Einstein.
That's right. But at that stage, we're talking about ChatGPT with an IQ of a
Right,
thousand.
right. So that's what I'm
With
saying.
an IQ of a
Ten
thousand,
thousand is unfathomable.
yeah, 10,000. You're now talking about roly polies trying to outsmart Einstein.
I don't know, man. Those roly polies, they know when to roll up.
Yeah, they know when to roll up. Well, and here's the thing. I mean, we may have to figure out when to roll up because at that point, when you think, well, smart it, we'll contain it, we'll put safety measures, you're you're not capable of coming up with anything that's going to contain this
Well,
thing.
I would think that's true at 1,000. I,
I
I,
think that's true at a
I would think it
thousand.
already would know how to prevent itself from ever being turned off, from ever being shut down. And those are like how to overcome every safety check that we could imagine.
Well, when we talked last week about determination and predestination, we talked about how algorithms like on Amazon and Google already can anticipate what you want before you know you want it.
Right, right.
And these things are not as, honestly, those algorithms are not as smart as what we're talking about. They're pretty dumb by comparison. So imagine if Amazon and Google can already anticipate what you want before you know you want it. Chat GPT 5 and Chat GPT 6, they already know what you've thought about to contain it. It's already anticipated everything you've thought about to before you thought about it. So it already knows.
Here's another thought too. Yeah, speaking, I mean, like, because what you're saying about it's forethought, if those are correct terms, and foreknowledge, if those are correct terms. I don't, those are the terms that we typically attribute again to God, and not anything else.
Mhm.
But what understanding would it have about the value of all human life when a scenario comes up in which they feel that the outcome that is necessary also determines the death of X amount of people. I mean, it's common. Like you and I are both big comic nerds, and I know that we both enjoyed the Avengers movies, and it's kind of this Thanos idea on one end, and it's also kind of this Vision idea. I don't know if you know the character of
Yeah.
Vision that was created by Tony Stark.
Love it.
Right. And their first attempt at it didn't go well. And it was, they created whatever it became. I don't remember the name of the second Avengers movie, but it's the robot that essentially becomes sentient and starts deciding what is best for all humankind. And their only answer to it was something equal in Vision, which had more of a moral compass. And who's to say, I mean, will it even have any moral compass?
What if it does? And its perfect consistency and morality still leads it to do some really bad things. Because we, with a moral compass, have sometimes been able to rationalize doing some pretty bad things because of what we're trying to stop or what we're trying to make happen or what we're trying to prevent.
Yeah, World War II.
And so, for instance, right, World War II. The idea is that if we have a land invasion of Japan, millions of lives are going to be lost, and so we decide that it's better for a few 100,000 people to die quickly as a result of an atomic blast than for millions of Japanese and Americans to die. And I don't think anybody in the right mind would consider incinerating a couple 100,000 people a good thing. And yet, our moral compass is how we decided to do it.
Yeah,
So this thing could be quite moral and yet still quite dangerous.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and it's scary. I mean, like, I don't, yeah. Well, lead us out here with what you brought into this biblically.
Oh, biblically, what I'd say biblically. Well, what I thought biblically is that the Lord has entrusted the care and the governance of this world into our hands. That's part of why God doesn't often intervene, and when He does, it's not to the extent that we might think an omnipotent, all-powerful God would intervene. We sort of Judaism and Christianity are very different than magical thinking in that read through the Old and New Testaments, there's very few miracles. And even those that experience them often are not sure what they're experiencing, how to interpret them, what to do with them. And very often, when they want God to intervene most, He doesn't, because to do so would to take away what He's given us, which is responsibility for the direction of planet Earth. What we're about to do is we're about to relinquish that to something else. We're about to create Earth's new master,
Yeah.
and uh, and I definitely think that warrants calling this as eschatological. Something radically different is going to change about the history of the world when we who have been given the governance of this world as our responsibility relinquish it over to something else. The next step of evolution is about to happen, and Earth is about to have a new superior life form, and it won't be us.
Mm.
And as a Christian, what does that mean? What
Right.
does that look like?
Well,
Is
and
that a good or bad thing?
biblically, you go back to the book of Judges, and we've always seemed to have this desire to have something rule over us. And a lot of times something rule over us that we create.
Ooh,
Uh,
ooh, that's such a good point. When the Israelites come begging for a king, God says, "You don't need a king. I'm your
yeah.
king. Follow me." And we're like, "No, no, that's not what we want. We want somebody to boss us around. We want somebody to tell us every step of the way what to do and to control." And God's heart. The Bible says God's heart's broken,
Hmm.
but He relinquishes. He says, "Okay,
Yeah.
that's not a good thing for you to ask for,
But
and I really wish you wouldn't, but I'll give it to you,
yep.
and it's
And
not
it
going to
was a
be
terrible
good."
thing for them.
Mhm.
And here we are about to do something very similar. Wow.
Ooh, boy, I did not think of Derek. That's a frightening but incredible insight. Um, yeah, far from being outdated and irrelevant, these ancient stories are so very important and still informative. Well, how about we end on root beer?
Man,
Like
root beer is still terrible, but if you're nervous, scared, or perishing, get you some. It's the answer.
my brother, thank you so much. What an interesting, fun conversation we've had today. I actually think this may be the best one so far.
Yeah,
So,
definitely on the AI for sure. And
yeah.
good stuff. And I can't wait to see what we got next week.
All right, man. See you
See ya.
soon.
Once again, we want to thank all of our listeners for joining us today on 2 Feet Deep. If you would like to reach out with any questions or thoughts, please email us at 2feetdeeppodcast@gmail.com. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and we'll see you next time.